I guess I'll just say what I wanted to say about Trump, and if we have time for questions, fine. And if we don't, we don't. And I'll jump right into it and try to make it short. I don't know what else was said, so I may end up repeating. I'll try to avoid sort of boilerplates and to minimize the chances of that. But we have to lay the foundation. So essentially, can everyone hear me? Just say
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So Trump didn't invent hostility to the press. I mean, leaders have always resented the people who question them, and rulers have always preferred praise to investigation. But what Trump did is to make it completely central and totally open, and to throw away any caution, any civic responsibility, and double down on clearly fomenting hatred towards any critic in the media. I cannot think of any major figure in an advanced democracy that did it quite this way, quite this extremely, and with quite the complete absence of even an attempt to hide what they're doing. I mean, before Trump, politicians attacked particular stories, particular outlets, maybe particular reporters. Trump has attacked the very legitimacy of the idea of criticism. He promoted mass political language in which the media became a hostile class and an alien camp and a rigged institution and basically an enemy force. He used the phrase fake news, as we know, to delegitimize all the media except for that which is clearly on his side. Now, to understand how effective he is, consider that fake news was a term that existed. Fake news meant uh, stories that were obviously fake, and somehow he changed the the consensus understanding of a phrase that existed before, which shows you how much sway he has, and that's an amazing thing that is in the realm of psychology more than politics. It's shocking if you think about it. He's called reporters, quote, some of the worst people you'll ever meet in general, not particular ones. He's attached labels like phony, nasty, disgraced, dumb, clueless, stupid, failing, dying, crazy, dishonest, phony, and disgraced to entire outlets, to the whole class of media, and to a student of history in particular, especially in the part of the world that this conference is taking place. It's especially showing that he repeatedly calls the media in general the enemy of the people. This is a phrase most commonly associated with Stalin and with summary executions. Trump's attacks on the independent media are directly connected to the fact that Trump appears to experience facts as an affront when they conflict with his preferred story, with a story that is convenient to him politically or that he chooses to believe, which one never fully knows. And the media, when it's serious, really has no choice at all but to stick to the facts. So when Trump says China pays the tariffs, which is totally untrue, because no country pays tariffs, the consumers or importers of the tariffing country pay the tariffs. The media cannot possibly support this view. The same with things he says about climate change or windmills or the 2020 election or the 9 wars he supposedly ended or many other issues. Now, once the situation has been created and the facts themselves become a political position, anyone insisting on them is portrayed as a political player, which the media is not and generally must not be. And this is the trick, because if he succeeds in making the media appear to be a political player, then a lot of people will start distrusting the media, not only on his side, also on the other side. If the media is seen as political, then it is undermining itself, and in so doing, completing the task of Trump. And because Trump has such a sway over the behavior and thinking of a huge proportion of the American public, somewhere between a quarter and a third, I'd say, and if it's a third, then it's 2/3 of the right, and then they can, through primary elections, sweep away opponents of Trump. He's also accelerated a transformation that was already underway, as we discussed yesterday. The collapse in trust in journalism. Because journalism is a thing somewhat outside the partisan battlefield, not above politics. Nothing is completely above politics, but outside these tribal front lines, enough to be recognized by enough people to enough of a degree as a referee or a credible witness. Instead, he succeeded through all this in making anti-media sentiment the badge of political identity. Go to America these days, but also other parts of the world. Distrust of journalism for many voters has become a signal of belonging. The sneer at the media is to announce that you belong. And this is one of several reasons why Trump why trust in the media has collapsed. But it put it past, I think, a critical threshold, past the Rubicon. The Gallup reports, and I think Alec Russell mentioned this yesterday, there are many polls that American trust in mass media is at a new low of 28% only, that say they have either a great deal or a fair amount of confidence that the media reports fully, accurately, and fairly. The figure used to be almost 2/3, maybe only a decade ago. So we see how he's waged this rhetorical war very effectively, but that's only the beginning, of course. And in the current second Trump term, he's really moved to the offense. Now, authoritarian-minded governments typically do this, and they don't begin by banning everything outright. That would be a dictatorship. And we're talking here about something else, this new invention, which you could call elected autocracy. They begin with pressure, they begin with warnings, access games, licensing threats, and so forth. You've seen this with Viktor Orban, with Putin, with Erdogan, law and justice in Poland. You would have seen it in Romania if the previous election had gone a different way. And that's what Trump is doing. But America has specificities. America's hyper-litigious environment has made it easy for him to intimidate through lawsuits. Trump has repeatedly used the courts as political instruments. Some cases are weak and are dismissed. That's not the point. The point is not necessarily to win in court, but to impose costs, create hesitation, shape coverage by telling the press it can be punished. It can be punished under the system the press itself views as legitimate, because the rhetoric is illegitimate, but the legal system is. So when you look at the numbers, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. The ABC News and George Stephanopoulos settled a defamation lawsuit for $50 million plus legal fees, not because they believed any of it, but because they didn't want to go through the process that would have undermined the media, basically. A year earlier, Trump filed a $470 million defamation suit against CNN for its use of the term big lie, a case that was dismissed. He also sued the New York Times over its reporting on his thing, but a spurious lawsuit is still a lawsuit, and it'll take some time before it's thrown out. And it was. That case, too, was dismissed, and Trump was ordered to pay legal fees. Defamation cases, outlets like CBS and even the BBC have been drawn into threatened litigation, public attack, settlements, even if there's no courtroom outcome. American news outlets have visibly altered their behavior as a consequence. CBS overhauled its news department, even allowing damage to be done to its crown jewel, the 60 Minutes program. They brought in a Trump-friendly new editor-in-chief after an acquisition, Barry Weiss, basically to placate Trump. Taken together, we see cumulative pressure, financial, legal, psychological, all placed on the press. And this is on an industry already financially weakened, as we've said in our session yesterday. They could ill afford it. Then there's regulatory pressure. Trump actually sent the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission to a right-wing podcast who suggested NBC, one of the three major broadcast networks of yore, might lose its broadcasting license, its license to do Seinfeld and Friends, which used to be a purely technical matter for keeping comedian Jimmy Kimmel on the air. This backfired due to a partner, affiliate, and shareholder rebellion, but they tried it, and for a while Kimmel was off the air. For similar reasons, officials have toyed with interfering with major media mergers that were planned. The state's ability to prevent mergers is an antitrust thing. It's to prevent monopolies from being created, not for political reasons. But even a suggestion that broadcast licenses and mergers and corporate approvals might be influenced by political displeasure is corrosive, because obviously democracies depend on a sufficient boundary between state power and editorial content. You just can't have the government behaving this way. But the thing is, the genius of Trump, what Trump has exposed, is that nothing is any more obvious. Human beings can adjust to anything. They can adjust to life in a concentration camp or under rocket fire or to living in Gaza. They can certainly adjust to Trump throwing out all norms and niceties just out the window. And then there's a transparent and unashamed use of access as a weapon. My own longtime agency, the Associated Press, suffered access restrictions that in the past would have been shocking. because they refused to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, per Trump's edict. Most news organizations suffered the removal of Pentagon access when they refused to allow the Department of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and his henchmen effectively to vet their copy, which is so un-American and so undemocratic that it boggles the mind, yet there are anymore. Nothing is obvious anymore. So once access becomes conditional, editors begin to ask, what will cost us access? Reporters begin to self-censor. Trump wants editors to play this game. He wants them to seek rewards and offer enticement, and this helps further the narrative that basically everything is for sale, everything is interest, no one has principles, everything is a little bit corrupt. And this is the key. Everyone, all of you, everyone, me, we've all lied in our life. But the idea that everyone's a liar, implicitly to the same degree, that helps the professional liar. The idea that everyone's corrupt is the cloak that hides true and extreme corruption. Trump's trick is to make everyone look like corrupt and complicit liars. To be fair, to channel my own Alec Russell, I understand he's gone. I gotta say, it's not all gloom and doom. The media has not simply surrendered. There have been legal challenges. There's been aggressive fact-checking. There has been a greater willingness to call falsehoods what they are. Some organizations have tried to reduce dependence on access, focusing more on documents, data, independent verification. AP did that. Yeah, this walks into the trap of the media seeming to be a political player. Yeah, but there's no choice. At some point, we have to trust the intelligence of the people, or of enough people, and to make doubly sure that we are accurate. Two last comments, I promise. There's a deeper irony here. For much of the 20th century, journalism, as we've been discussing, tried to define itself as professional and procedural and distinct from political combat. But historically, the press was often partisan. I'm actually writing a book about the history of journalism and researching a little bit how it happened in Germany and Britain and France and even Eastern Europe. In the 19th century, newspapers were openly aligned with parties, ideologies, factions, labor unions. Neutrality was not the starting point of journalism. It was an achievement, I would say. And Trump has helped unravel that achievement. He helped turn journalism back into something closer to what it once was, which is a field of political combat. And that obviously is bad for journalism, worse for democracy. But it may be temporary, it may be cyclical. That the Trump era needs to be survived by journalism and by democracy and by society, that's obvious. He'll eventually be gone, and I doubt we'll see another quite like him. That can only be done by doubling down and producing great journalism, period, but also promoting it aggressively and encouraging a discourse around a need for it. But the last thing I'll say is that that's a little bit too easy. There's one more thing the media, I think, needs to keep in mind. The American media, at least, but also in Western and Eastern Europe, in its efforts to chronicle reality, completely missed, or maybe largely missed, that a huge part of society was becoming receptive to this kind of message. It just missed. The series of grievances bubbling beneath the surface that have made so many people so angry. And the reasons are many. More immigration than people wanted, more globalization than people wanted, more progressivism than people wanted. Whatever it was, it differs from country to country, but also there are common factors. The mainstream media drifted away from too much of the public. There were many forces at play here, including bad faith players that drove radicalism in the political agenda, including social media. But my point is that I was in the media. I kind of missed it. I remember going to Davos year after year, the media elite, the political elite, no one was talking about it because we were insulated in the bubble of the elites. So that was a mistake. Mistakes have consequences. But if you learn from mistakes and survive the consequences, you come out stronger. And if media comes out stronger and better, then society will benefit. And I guess that's the ultimate hope, that this is to channel the cliche, the moment that is darkest before the dawn.
Dan, thank you very much. Will you be able to take a few questions? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Will you be able to take a few questions?
Sure, if you have time, I have time.
Back there.
So are there questions?
Yeah. So if you let me. So I would like to ask you about the future of Trump and the Republican Party, because now we see, due to this war of Trump in Iran, some of very influential actors like Tucker Carlson, and Joe Rogan opposing themselves to this war, and we see a division in MAGA movement about this war, and we see as well G.D. Vance that he, as far as I know, has not yet taken a clear position about his and this war, so he can be actually a reserve candidate to say after Trump era that, look, I was opposing this war. So how do you see the future of Trump, the future of the Republican Party after this war began?
I mean, it's hard to say, but the fact is that I think Trump has exposed that about a third of the people in America, which are 2/3 of the Republican Party, and therefore probably that is the future of the Republican Party, share his fundamental instincts. Now, you could say that his fundamental instinct was isolationist and disinterest in the world, and therefore the war is a departure from his instincts, and that is why you have this division that's emerging now. And that could be true, but it also might not be true, because the war really isn't, I think, about promoting democracy and for the war. It would be, but in the case of Trump, I think Trump wants to make America great again in a sense of like victories wherever he can get them, and if not real victories, the appearance of victories. And he thought he identified a weak player where he could, achieve something that looks like a win, and he goes for it with disinterest and procedure in getting approval from Congress and consulting with NATO before. The idea that we don't have to go through niceties because might makes right, and great powers will act like great powers within our sphere of influence, I think that is shared by this 1/3. The 1/3 is basically nationalist, and it has elements of fascistic as well. It also has elements of a type of nationalism that is isolationist and not new. America First actually was a term that existed on the American right in the 1930s, and it had to do with opposition to entering World War II and indifference to whatever Hitler does. So these two elements in the American right and far right always existed. They are somewhat at loggerheads. Trump may have miscalculated where things sit in his decision to go after Iran. It's a complex decision because for all the imperfections of the procedure Trump went through, and apparently for the strategic planning for the war, if we're to judge by what's happening at present, the argument against the Islamic Republic is very strong. So there's a lot of confusion there. I wouldn't bet against Trump in the Republican Party. I think in the first couple of weeks, it was looking like there are real divisions, but it's kind of settled on a situation where 90% of MAGA is in favor of the war. So we see that he is, despite the fact that he's so seemingly inarticulate and ignorant in the views of an educated person, I think he has incredible power to convince his base. What happens to the Republicans afterwards, vis-a-vis Iran, will depend on the outcome in Iran. And there's 3 or 4 possible outcomes, and I think we don't have really time for me to go into them. But the Republican Party, I think, might go one of 2 ways. Either it'll be J.D. Vance et al., meaning at least it pretends to continue Trumpism, versus Marco Rubio, which is something more of a standard Republican. I mean, Rubio has sold his soul as well, but you can kind of tell he's pretending. And he would be a return to something closer to standard neoconservative American Republican global activism and so forth. That's a choice. Hard to tell where it's going to go. Based on what we've seen so far, I wouldn't put a lot of money betting against MAGA. I think the chances are very small that in the near term we revert to the status quo antebellum, to someone like Mitt Romney or John McCain. I think that's not in the near-term future for the Republican Party. This attaches, and this is the last thing I'll say about that, to the fact that America currently no longer really has two camps. The two-party system makes sense to view it as such if you really have two schools of thought. And then, yeah, a third party would split one of them, and then because it's a first past the post system, it would harm its own side. But that only works if you really have two schools of thought. You currently have three. You have the 1/3 that is this Trumpiness, happy to burn down the house and to hate the FBI, just this thing we see that, as I say, we all missed, kind of. You have about 1/6 progressives in all the ways that they do great things and maybe some not so great things. And in the middle, if you do the math, there's about 1/2 of everyone else. And I would say that kind of includes Mitt Romney and John McCain as standard Republicans and centrist Democrats like Joe Biden. And if they somehow joined the center right and center left, they would win almost every state because it's about 50% of the people. And you're going to hear more and more about this. And it's not so clear to me that a major centrist third party will not form.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Perry. First of all, I'm very interested in your prediction about the Republican Party going two ways, essentially a continuation of MAGA or back to someone like Rubio. I found that very interesting. But what I wanted to ask you about is specifically in regards to Trump's attitude towards the media that you mentioned at the beginning of your intervention, how he essentially reframed the media as both a political player and the greatest enemy of the people and basically the worst people ever. Now, I think we see a lot of this, a lot of what Trump has done in this. I think we see a lot of that in Europe as well, especially in spaces where there are politicians who are sort of following Trump's example, in Romania, Hungary, and so on. My question is, after Trump, do you believe that there is a possibility that we may go back to the previous status quo where the president of the United States couldn't, like, I don't know, directly insult the journalist right to his face after getting asked a question or something like that? Or is that pretty much just over with? Like, we're just entering a new era of interacting with politics?
Well, the new era has to do with the elements that helped elevate Trumpism, like social media. That's not going away. But this way of being, I think, is sui generis, the Latin term that means of its own being. This is part of the problem with Iran. Israel and America thought if they killed Khamenei, they'd get rid of the system. But Iran didn't depend on one person, like maybe Nazism did. I think Trumpism in its current form, not to compare him to Hitler, it's not what I mean, but they may both be sui generis. I think after Trump, you won't have a Trump. It's unique. People think he emerged in 2015 or maybe during The Apprentice. I went to the University of Pennsylvania and had a minor at the Wharton School of Business. That is the school that Trump graduated from. And I remember when I was in university in 1985, Trump, as a former alumnus, was going to come speak. And he was maybe 37. And there were huge demonstrations at the business school not to let him come. Because even back then, he was thought to be something dark and sinister and corrupt and disgraceful. He's been something special for 50 years now. And I think when he's gone, you might have a version of it. But even J.D. Vance, that currently is seen as the manifestation of Trumpism, the most likely to carry that mantle in 2028, J.D. Vance was saying 6 or 7 years ago that Trump is a disgrace and a liar and corrupt. So both Vance and Rubio are pretending. Vance just pretends better. Will a real Trump emerge? Someone just like him? Maybe. But I have trouble seeing someone like this actually being popular. I mean, they would then be portrayed as fascistic and racist, and that would hurt them, even though Trump has not been hurt by obvious misogyny and so forth. So my feeling is social media and the horrible consequences of it, alongside the good things, are going to be with us forever. Hyperpartisanism hyper-personalification of politics. These things are probably going to stay. The center having trouble holding, and the extremes will continue probably. So you'll have fragmentation, but I think we'll see a return to something more normal, even if a Republican is elected. If a Republican is elected, by the way, there's other issues, because the American system gives the Republicans a huge advantage electorally, and it creates a tyranny of the minority because of certain specific things about the American electoral system in the Senate and with the Electoral College. And their minority positions that they're imposing on the country are going to be a problem for the majority, no matter what, going forward. But on the other hand, if a Democrat wins, you're going to see an absolute return. They're going to try like nobody's business to make everyone forget about Trump. They're going to be so nice to NATO and so nice to the EU, and that's going to be their brand if they get elected. And then the question will be whether the Europeans are prepared to forgive and forget. And that I cannot say. I suspect yes, but there will always be in the back of everyone's minds the idea that the Americans are capable of electing such a figure and basically abandoning the alliance. And moreover, it's been revealed that the American presidency really is imperial. And if you elect one person that has a mania about tariffs or likes dictators or, you know, hates windmills, then all of a sudden, that's it. The American system, a huge irony, considering that they revere the Constitution, they've turned the Constitution into a religion, and the Constitution, A, made itself impossible to change, and B, was specifically anti-monarchic. They wanted to prevent this. And weirdly, in its internal imperfections, they've cemented it. And I think America's allies have to consider that this makes America, despite the tremendous value that America still has in the world. God, it's unbelievable how potentially a force for good America is, at the same time, a very undependable ally. A lot of issues internally in America need to be fixed.
It's lunchtime here in Turda. Does anybody want to come in with a quick question and a quick reply now that we've got Dan? Nothing else? Dan, I think thank you very much indeed for coming back.
Thank you, John. Thank
Really
you,
good of
Pamela,
you,
and everyone. My pleasure. Thank you.
We'll see you soon again. Many thanks.
Bye.